So we have our rocket done, we have our smoke done, and we have our typography done. And now let's kind of do some small adjustments to make sure the balance is correct. So I think the typography size is okay. I wish I had a little more breathing room here between the outside of the type and the outside of the seal. So maybe we can make this a little bit smaller. So I'm just going to highlight all the text, make it a little bit smaller, and then rotate this. Once again, if you just want to do a quick rectangle tool to make sure it is kind of lining up, I just need to rotate this just a little bit. And of course, there's always the thought that we can make this a little bit smaller and make that outer band a little bit bigger. It's always great to have breathing room. Always have students, they do logos and they definitely mean well, but they bump up typography and other graphic elements so close to edges. It just gives a sense of anxiety when things are really close to the edge. So I do like to put a little of that extra padding, and you'll see me talk about this over and over in class. And I think it's important that spacing and white space and clear space and margins are really valued, because it really does kind of help everything breathe and feel a little bit more professional. And this is when we can start to duplicate our graphic a few times and do some different variations on color and sizing just to see what works better. So I'm just going to create a couple of duplicates and see if we can't tweak one and see if we can't improve on the first design in little ways. So one thing we can do is add a little pop of gold just to kind of see what a little gold looks like. So we're going to add a little bit of a gradient, and we're going to go and put my layer panel back over here, and we're going to call out our gradients. So this is our gradient window, and I want to go up to my swatches, and I want to go to my library, and there's a lot of great default swatches in your library if you go down to your little library icon right here in your swatches panel. And I'm going to load some default gradients. I'm going to go down to default swatches. I'm going to go to gradients, and there's one called metals, and it has some pretty good default metallic silver and gold gradients that we can go ahead and use. And there's one in here, I think it's the first one here, just called gold. So I'm going to go ahead and go ahead and ungroup my shuttle. And I'm going to select the left sides of the booster rockets. And I'm going to go ahead and click on gold. And you got to be really careful with gradients. You want to make sure they're nice and smooth. So right now it's really tight and it looks a little bit dated. So what we could do is select both of these, or at least select one of them, get our gradient tool, and I'm just going to click and hold and do a nice long gradient. So it just kind of looks a little bit more professional. If you did a really tight gradient, you kind of see all the transitions of the different colors in the gradient, and it makes it look a little dated. So I like to kind of do nice, long, smooth gradients. Kind of has a better transition that way. You can always tweak specific colors. I can even just drag this down and delete a color to make it darker, or just double click that particular swatch and make it darker that way. So now we're going to do the same thing on the other side of the rocket. We're going to just get the eyedropper tool, and we're just going to adapt that same gradient and get our gradient tool and do the opposite direction. So if I have light up here and dark down here, I want to do dark up at the top and light at the bottom, and it's going to kind of give a little 3D dimensional look to it. Just like that. We do the same thing on the other side. Get our gradient tool, do a nice long gradient, and we have the opposite side, the opposite, and let's drag it up to the right, and that'll do dark on the top. So that kind of gives it a little bit of dimension. And we can do the same thing to our typography. So when you add gradients to a typography, when it's live typography, you're going to go ahead and click right here on the swatch. It's going to just turn black because live typography cannot have gradients on them. You have to right click and create outlines on the typography first. So that's what we're going to do here. We are going to take this live typography, which when I say it's live, I can double click and I can add letters and change it. So what we're going to do here when we're final with the typography choice, because once you create outlines, you can't go back. So I'm going to right click I'm going to create outlines, and that's going to outline my type. And I can go ahead and take the eyedropper tool and sample that same gradient swatch we've been using. I'm going to take the gradient tool and do a nice long gradient, because if I do a tight gradient, it looks really cheap. Let's go do like a little short gradient so you can see all the little lines there, and that could have an added value or an added effect that you want to go for, but let's just do a nice long sweeping gradient. So just clicking and holding, and it's going to add that gradient for us. And we can even ungroup, since we created outlines on the typography, we can right click and ungroup, and now I have control over each little letter if I wanted to add a gradient individually as well. And it may be that another gradient swatch might work really well, like a radial gradient. And we'll talk about that more later in the class. So just kind of giving you a little crash course in some typography that we'll definitely review in a lot more detail a little bit later. So just adding a little bit of gold there to that, we can even brighten this gradient up. We can even double click this yellow and make it white to brighten it up, and change our dials of how the gradient is loaded. Let's try something different with this next one. So we're getting to practice a lot of tools and learn some tools we haven't gone over yet by doing this project. So that's why I love to do project-based work, is we get to kind of use those tools in a practical way, get to kind of go, oh, that's how you use it, or that's when I use it. So with this one, let's get rid of the rings. Let's just have one background. Let's get rid of the typography. Let's kind of just do a vector art graphic. Let's add some stars. So we can manually draw stars with a pen tool. We can get a rounded rectangle tool and kind of draw some stars. So I'm going to create kind of a top, and I'm going to duplicate this by holding down Option. I'm going to hold down Option and drag. And I'm going to show you a cool trick. If I've already shown this before, I apologize, but it's great to go over it. If you go up and you can rotate this manually, and it shows you the degrees that it has, depending on what version of Illustrator you have. But if I want to do perfect 45-degree clicks all the way around without having to sit there and try to find 45 degrees or 180 degrees, I can hold down the Shift and then get the corner and drag it. And then it's going to automatically do 45-degree clicks, which is super duper handy. So if I want to just click it here, duplicate it, I'm going to do a 45-degree angle click. Make it shorter. And I'm just creating like a little star, I guess you could say, a little twinkle star. Hold down Shift, just clicking it over. And you can create little stars that way. Or you can cheat a little bit and get the star tool. And don't worry, we're not going to leave it like that. We're going to do kind of a special effect to it. So I wanted to talk about the transform tools briefly. So if you go up to Effect, you'll go down and you'll see something called Distort and Transform. And there's a couple cool things you can do with several of these options, so definitely play around with those and see kind of the different shapes you can create. I'll do a quick example here for you. I'm going to create a circle, just an ellipse. Let's go ahead and make it a different color. And if I were to go to Effect, down to Distort and Transform, I'm going to go down. This is just one of them that we're going to explore. It's called Zigzag. So I'm going to click on Zigzag, and I can do a preview, and you can do some really neat things here. I'm going to reduce the size all the way down, maybe just all the way down at the very end. But you could create a lot of great seal graphics and badges that have certain kind of smooth or sharp edges. Just like you see here in the examples, you see all these badges. You can create all this using the Zigzag tool and the Distort and Transform tools. So I can increase the ridges per segment, so that's going to add different points along the circle. So if I add more, you can almost get like a Reese cup, or kind of a for sale, a sales sticker kind of thing if you're doing a promotion. So lots of neat things you could do with Distort and Transform. But in this case, we're going to use a different one. So we're going to select our star. We're going to go up to Effect, Distort and Transform. And for this one, we're going to do pucker and bloat. So pucker and bloat. So we're going to do a preview, and I'm going to show you kind of what this does. So pucker is going to suck some of those anchor points inside the graphic, and it's going to create a cool star just like that. You could also bloat it up and kind of create almost a flower type effect. So that's worth exploring if you want to kind of check that out. But we're going to just do a little star just like that, and then we can just hold down Option and kind of make it smaller and rotate and just get some stars on here. And if I ever want to edit an effect, I've already done an effect, but I want to go back and make it even more dramatic or less dramatic, I can go back to my appearance panel right here, and it's going to list all the effects I have on a particular object. And here's the pucker and bloat, so I can go ahead and click on that, click on preview, and I can go back to where my settings are and maybe make it less dramatic or even exaggerate it even more. So I'm going to do a little bit less on this one. So each one maybe has a different level of effect. So I like to kind of randomize these stars a little bit so it doesn't look like they are just the same star replicated over and over, that there's some unique qualities in arrangement of the stars. So there's kind of some stars to our graphic. And what I'd like to do is kind of freshen this up a little bit and add kind of a gradient look to the background. But instead of just using a standard flat gradient, I'd like to use a new tool. It's called the Freeform Gradient tool. And this is in Adobe Illustrator 2020 and beyond. I actually think it is on the 2019 version. I'll have to go back and check, but I'm pretty sure 2019, 2020 versions will have this. But you can always use the mesh tool to create the same effect if you have an older version of Adobe Illustrator. So we're going to go to Gradient. I'm going to call out our Gradient panel. And there it is. If you have 2019 or 2020, you'll see the Freeform Gradient tool. I'm just going to I highlighted my big circle here, and I'm just going to click on Freeform Gradient. And it's going to load some different points here that I can drag and manipulate. And I can click on another open area to add a point of color. So I can double click any of these points and add a color. And I can double click over here and add, let's say, kind of a deeper color, kind of some deep, rich navy blues. And you can add as many points as possible. So if you want to add up here maybe a lighter blue, just make that a little bit lighter. It just creates kind of a fresh dynamic color. And you can expand the radius of this dot by clicking down here on this little dot and just kind of making it a little bit bigger and smaller, just like that. It kind of adds a modern pop. And if you didn't have that, you could do the Gradient Mesh tool. So I'm going to highlight this, and you would just find it right here. Usually it's with your Gradient tool in a drop-down menu, and I would do Mesh tool. And you click anywhere around here, it's going to create a mesh, which is kind of an array of different points that you can change the color. And you can click anywhere to create different mesh points. So the more mesh points you add, the more complex your mesh will be. So I can get the direct selection tool and highlight any one of these anchor points and change the color. And it's going to work similar to the Freeform Gradient tool. It's a little bit more complex of a tool. So you just get that anchor point tool and add all sorts of different things. And you could take the direct selection tool. You could even take these anchors and twist them to kind of get a really cool effect. And we go over gradient meshes a little bit later in the course in more detail. So let's go ahead and go back to what we had. I'm just doing Command Z, going back in our history and getting back to what we had before. So that is an option. What I like to do is kind of put a little angle or a little spin on this because this looks great and orderly. But if I were to select everything and shift it just a little bit to the right, kind of give it a little bit of a diagonal angle, I think it adds a lot of dynamic angles to it, and it could add something nice. So we have several different options here. Let's go ahead and delete this to choose from. Some with typography, some with gradients, some with kind of more of a flat illustration. A lot of different options here. So this is what we ended up coming up with in the short project. We were able to practice several tools. Feel free to re-watch this. This is a lot of tools thrown at you at the same time. We were able to trace using our tracing worksheet and really practice the pen tool and the shape builder tool. But hopefully here you've really seen the value of mastering the pen tool and feeling comfortable with it, but also combining that with the shape builder tool to be able to combine and delete shapes that you create with the pen tool and with the basic shapes tool to pretty much create anything you want. You can trace over a face with the same method where you trace around, and you're able to kind of take the eyedropper tool, sample skin colors, and you can craft some pretty cool vector art and illustrations. And of course with vector, it's scalable. I can make this as big as I can. This could make a logo or an emblem or a symbol, or it could be just vector art or illustration. It could be a badge. A lot of different things you can do with this. So I want you to create a student project. I want you to attempt this rocket. I want you to find a rocket from one of the free websites where you can find a photo of a rocket. You can do some of the newer rockets that have been released by SpaceX or some of the new aerospace companies that are coming out with the rockets of the future. You could decide to trace any rocket you like. I'd like you to make a badge or seal graphic, vector art graphic, to practice a lot of the tools we just used. I want you to be able to trace that photo and simplify it to make a really cool flat image. You can explore gradients or keep it totally flat with single colored swatches. Whatever you'd like to do, I want you to kind of experiment with this just to practice those tools and to really get comfortable with the pen tool. Moving forward, we're going to start to get into logo design, and this is some great tools to already know before we start to tackle something a little bit more complex like logo design.